When the twilight falls upon New York's towering skyscrapers, the city appears like a magical fairytale. But for Clara Vance, standing in a luxurious penthouse on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, this light was a nightmare. Steam rose from the coffee cup in her hand, but her body felt icy cold. Clara Vance, the name alone conjured images of a successful architect, whose touch unveiled new horizons in modern architecture. Yet, Clara's inner world was a ruin. Her father, Arthur Vance, was an emperor in the real estate world, his empire stretching from New York to Los Angeles. Her mother, Eleanor Vance, a former model, was now the epitome of social influence. Their lives seemed as flawless as a newspaper's front page. But Clara knew that beneath this perfect facade lay a toxic darkness, slowly consuming her. From a young age, Clara had been raised in a peculiar environment. Whenever she tried to recall an event clearly, her parents would tell her, "Clara, you're seeing things wrong. Your mind isn't right." This is called gaslighting. They constantly tried to convince her that her own memory was unreliable. She was regularly given medications that kept her in a perpetual haze. She began to feel like a stranger to herself. When David entered Clara's life, it felt like a sudden rain shower in a desert. David was a simple doctor, but his mind was as clear as glass. He understood Clara from their very first meeting at an art gallery. As Clara stood alone in a corner, gazing at a melancholic painting, David approached her. He said, "The painting isn't speaking, but you are." That was the beginning. David taught Clara to trust her own eyes. He tried to pull Clara out of the web of illusions her parents had spun. But Arthur and Eleanor Vance noticed this change. For them, Clara was merely a possession, whom they controlled to maintain their empire. Especially the trust fund in Clara's name, inherited from her real parents, haunted them with the fear of losing control. They began to weave a dirty conspiracy against David. They tried to convince Clara that David was only after her wealth. Eleanor would say, "Clara, who would selflessly love a sick girl like you? He's just after our money." They started making various false accusations against David, calling him greedy and claiming he had a dark past. But David stood firmly by Clara's side. He explained to Clara that her parents were doing all this to control her. David would tell Clara, "Clara, your parents love you, but their love is unhealthy. They consider you their property. Don't listen to them. Do what your heart tells you." Just 10 days before the wedding, Clara's life took a drastic turn. One morning, she found an anonymous envelope on her office desk. Inside, she was stunned to find intimate photos of David with another woman. The pictures were taken in such a way that it seemed David was cheating with that woman. The envelope slipped from Clara's hand. Her whole body trembled. Her entire world seemed to sway. When she, trembling, went to her mother with these photos, Eleanor calmly said, "I knew it, Clara. I warned you before. But you trust that outsider more than us. Now that you've seen it yourself, what more can I say?" There was no sympathy in Eleanor's eyes, only a cold, victorious smile. When Clara confronted David with the photos, he was aghast. He swore they were all lies, all staged. But the seed of doubt planted in Clara's mind gnawed at her. Due to her parents' gaslighting, she had lost her judgment. Should she believe her parents, or her love? For the next few days, Clara received a barrage of anonymous messages, all trying to prove that David was a fraud, a greedy manipulator. Clara completely lost her sense of judgment. She couldn't sleep. She started talking less with David. David realized that Clara was falling into her parents' trap again. Clara thought, "My mind wasn't working. My parents always said my memory was weak. Am I really seeing things wrong? Is David really deceiving me? My heart told me David was innocent, but my parents' words echoed in my ears." The night before the wedding, the rehearsal dinner was a grand affair in the Vance family's sprawling garden. Hundreds of distinguished guests were present. Clara looked like a princess in her expensive white gown, but under her eyes were traces of tears, hidden by makeup. David repeatedly tried to talk to her, to explain, but Eleanor was like a shadow by Clara's side. She wouldn't let David near Clara. Clara realized her parents were trying to keep her away from David. After dinner, Arthur Vance raised a glass, intending to make an announcement. Everyone thought he would bless the new couple. But Arthur began, "My daughter Clara has always been a bit emotional. We have discovered some terrible truths about the man she has chosen as her life partner. I regret having to say these unpleasant things on this joyous occasion, but I don't want my daughter's life to be ruined." David's face turned pale. He realized a final blow was coming against him. Clara stood with her head bowed, feeling as if she would faint at any moment. Just then, an elderly woman entered through the garden gate. She wore a simple cotton saree, but her eyes held an indomitable fire. She was none other than Martha, Clara's childhood nanny and Arthur's elder sister. She had been cast out of the family 20 years ago, labeled as mad. Martha had been a close friend of Clara's real parents and had looked after Clara after their death. But Arthur had falsely accused her and driven her away. Martha walked directly towards the stage. Eleanor tried to stop her, saying, "Martha, what are you doing here? Guards, take her out." But Martha loudly declared, "Enough, Eleanor. What you did to me 20 years ago, I will not let happen to Clara today. All masks will fall today." Martha held an old leather bag. From it, she pulled out a digital audio recorder and some legal documents. She turned on the recorder. Arthur and Eleanor's voices filled the garden through the speakers. They were discussing how fake photos were created against David, how something was mixed into Clara's medication to keep her perpetually confused. The entire garden fell silent as stone. Arthur and Eleanor's own voices provided undeniable proof of their conspiracy. Arthur's voice on the recorder, "How long can we keep Clara fooled like this? David has ruined everything." Then Eleanor's voice, "Don't worry. Her memory is already weak. We'll convince her David is a fraud. And we have those pictures, don't we?" But Martha dropped the real bombshell a little later. She produced legal documents proving that Clara's real parents, Arthur's younger brother and his wife, had not died in a road accident. Instead, Arthur Vance had orchestrated a planned accident to seize their vast fortune. Clara was the sole heir to that family. Arthur had raised her as his own daughter to keep the entire property under their control. Martha had been gathering these proofs for 20 years. She knew that one day, truth would prevail. Clara stood like a stone. Her lifelong beliefs, her parents, her identity, everything shattered in an instant. She saw that the people standing before her were actually her parents' murderers. A murmur spread among the guests. The police, already informed by Martha, were waiting outside the gate. As Arthur and Eleanor were led away by the police, they couldn't even look at Clara. Their arrogance, their power, everything seemed to vanish in an instant. In their eyes, there was only fear and shame. The next morning, there was no lavish wedding. Clara and David simply went to a church and pledged to stand by each other. Their love was now stronger, for they had faced a harsh truth together. Clara recovered her ancestral property with Martha's help. She sold the grand mansion and used the money to establish a charity foundation that helps victims of domestic abuse and gaslighting. Clara no longer stands before a mirror, doubting her memories. She knows that truth often comes late, but when it does, it has the power to erase all darkness. The towering skyscrapers of New York no longer intimidate her. She now lives in a new light of her own making. Her life is no longer a puppet in someone else's hands. She is now the architect of her own destiny. Revenge did not destroy her, instead, it gave her a new birth. She is now free, she is now independent. And behind this victory lies that long wait and an indomitable fight for truth.